This is very much a webinar. We want this to not be just the kind of book launches that you sometimes get where everybody says, "Oh, isn't this a wonderful book?" And you go away after an hour feeling very positive, but without much kind of intellectual stimulation. What we're hoping you're going to get out of this morning is that our panelists here are going to start a conversation first among themselves, and I had some questions for them. And then after a while, we will bring everyone else in as well for a Q&A where we can explore some of these topics which are so important to the Climate Majority Project and to this book. I'm just going to wave now multiple copies of this book to prove to you that it's really kind of very purchasable. And these copies, some of them can end up in your hands if you haven't yet got one in your hot hands. So yes, that's the plan for the call this morning. Well, let's get underway. So, John, I'm going to come to you first. Tell us a little bit about the Climate Majority Project and its importance as you see it, and why you were happy to write what I must say is such a delightfully positive foreword for us to the book.
Well, thank you very much. The first and fundamental fact is that I began to discover when I talked to members of Parliament that they all said the same thing. They said, "Oh, nobody ever raises this on the doorstep." That happened when I started to quiz the candidates for by-elections. Why was there nothing in their election manifestos about climate change? Why did they avoid talking about the huge issues? Why, when it was raining for the 47th consecutive day, did they not actually think it was important? And it was always the same thing. We never have it on the doorstep. And so for me, the first part of the whole concept of this book is actually to get people talking and talking everywhere about this issue. And unless we do that, we can't break through in the political realm. The second thing that became more and more clear is that we actually have to make sure of the opinions and the views of the people who are standing in elections. I'm sure Caroline will agree with me that one of the difficulties is, because of the consensus for net zero by 2050, a very large number of candidates in all three major political parties hide behind that. They just say, "This is what my party thinks." I'm not interested in that. I think that we've got to make sure that each candidate says what they think, because there is a huge difference between one and another. There's a Labour candidate, now a member of Parliament, will be a candidate for what must be seen as one of the safest seats in Britain, who is a climate change denier. There are Tory candidates who have been chosen who are extremely good on climate, but at the same time, there are other candidates who suggest that they should stop spending any money on climate change and use it all for cutting taxes. So you need to know about the individuals. First, talk enough for the candidates to recognise they've got to say something. Secondly, we've got to press these people to say exactly where they stand in order that we can make choices in voting and, more importantly, keep their feet to the fire were they to be elected. And the last reason why I think this book is so important is simply because we are not willing to talk about these matters in the language which ordinary people use. We kind of think that everybody ought to be interested in climate change because we understand just how serious it is. But most people have got a life to live, a lot of difficulties, money, emotional, all the other issues we know, Aunt Harriet, Mrs. Smith, all these things really bend in on them. If you want them to understand and talk about climate, we have to talk about it in ways which they do understand. And what I like about this book is that it's written by people who understand that so importantly. So for me, it's making people recognize it's important and that if they're standing as candidates, they better recognize that. Making people understand that an awful lot of people are watching what they personally think and will keep them to it. And above all, making people throughout the nation understand why it is that climate change is the greatest material threat of our time.
Wow, John, thank you so much. You've got us off to a cracking start there. You've really brought out beautifully some key aspects of our project, the crucial importance of genuine cross-party working, a genuine endeavour to depolarize, and as you said towards the end there, how essential it is to be able to speak to different audiences, different demographics, in a language that they understand, and not, for instance, get stuck in a sort of bubble of progressive ideology or jargon or anything like that. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Caroline, over to you. You can respond to that if you wish, although you get a chance to do so after each person has made their initial remarks. And I know you've got some things you wanted to say yourself. So please, Caroline Lucas, delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Rupert. Can you just confirm that you can hear me all right? Because I've been struggling with technology.
We can hear you, but it's a little bit choppy. So I think if you speak slowly, loud, and clearly, close to the mic, that'll be good.
Okay, thank you. I'm not using my normal computer. Listen, it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much to everybody who's put so much energy and effort into this book. Fantastic to follow John as ever, with whom I agree alarmingly often and comprehensively. This is an important moment, and I think that the book is incredibly timely, because the question of how we build that mass movement for climate action is surely the biggest question that we face, because without it, frankly, it's pretty clear that governments and parliaments aren't going to act. They need to feel that pressure, that pressure on the doorstep that John was talking about. And that's all the more so, I think, when climate is being weaponized as part of the new culture war, when we have a government right now that's rolling back its climate commitments, when it's giving the green light to more oil and gas, which frankly just seems obscene, and when in last week's budget the word climate appeared once in the Chancellor's statement. So we've got our work cut out for us. And this book, I think, really charts a way through that, and is in that respect a hopeful book based on evidence, not just kind of hope that is like a lottery ticket that Rebecca Solnit writes so powerfully about. That's not that sort of hope. This is the kind of hope, she says, that breaks down doors in an emergency. And I think that's the kind of radical hope that this book has in it, and that we need at this moment. In terms of that mass movement, how we're going to get that mass mobilization, I guess the question of why it's not happening has to be the prior question. And I'm always reminded by that wonderful film, The Age of Stupid, which many of you might remember. Its assumption is that there's someone who has survived, a single survivor of some kind of climate catastrophe. It's 2050. He's looking back at the weather reels, the weather forecast, the news items from. He's in 2050. He's looking back to now, and he says in words that still makes their hairs go up on the back of my neck every time I think of it. He says, "Why is it, knowing what we knew then, we didn't act when there was still time?" And to me, that question is the biggest question, frankly, that we face right now. There are a whole set of possible answers. Partly it's the vested interest of the fossil fuel industry, which is, let us not be in any doubt, fighting back really hard. That there are real vested interests at stake here. Or it's the fact that people are just trying to get by dealing with the latest challenge of a cost of living crisis that was not of their making. Or maybe it is all of those advertisements. I want to use that wonderful quote by Professor Jackson when he talks about the power.
Caroline, you've just gone quite choppy, actually. I'm sorry to interrupt for a second, your beautiful flow there. I'm not sure what you can do about that. I wonder if you should actually turn your image off. That might help. It's non-ideal, but we want to be able to hear your words. So yeah, I invite you to carry on close to the mic and all that.
Okay, many apologies.
That's a bit better.
I was just saying that it was an opportunity to quote from the wonderful Professor Tim Jackson, who talks about the power of advertising that persuades us to spend money we don't have on things we don't need, to make impressions that don't last on people we don't care about. So there are a whole number of objective reasons why perhaps we are not getting that mobilization that we need for climate action. But it seems to me that the most crucial reason that we're not getting it is that people don't dare feel what climate change is truly about. Academically, theoretically, we know about the dangers of exceeding 1.5 degrees, but rarely do we risk emotionally connecting with that reality. And perhaps one of the reasons that we don't is that we fear the darkness that might engulf us if we do. How do we cope with the thought that humanity may not wake up in time, that climate change might become irreversible, that societies, even in the developed world, might no longer have the ability to respond to or to cope? And I think it's in trying to answer those questions and to address those real, strong emotional currents that the analysis in this book about what the authors call inner work is so important, because unless we are able to confront emotionally the reality of the climate crisis, I feel that that we won't have the space to recognize what is being done, or what we are doing, I should say. Let's not put it in the passive tense. What is being done, what we are complicit in doing, not actively, not deliberately, but because of the systems in which we are embedded. But also, it's precisely by facing up to some of those emotional concerns that we can then find the connections with each other, with future generations, and in ourselves, which I think would be the font of emotion going forward and the resilience going forward that we're going to need if we're to address the climate crisis with the speed and the scale that it requires. So that sense of inner work, that sense of finding a safe way to confront and then to move through, hopefully, and move on, to confront that emotional power of the climate emergency. I think this book really offers us some incredibly important pointers and a way to do that.
Wow, thanks so much, Caroline. Your words really shone through the technical difficulties there, and it's so great to hear you homing in on that importance of that shared inner work, that collective psychological resilience building, which is a crucial element of our theory of change, and we believe it's really the thing which has been most missing from the climate space to date. And it's why, as I was saying before we got started with this webinar, that we put such an emphasis on this in our own strategic campaigning work, because we think this can unleash something much bigger if people are able to be coping, and more than coping, with the difficult climate emotions that they're understandably feeling. There's an incredible energy there which can turn from something which is disabling into something which is actually positive and confers an active hope on the world. So yeah, I think what you just said there was so important and so helpful. John, it's over to you. John Alexander, author of Citizens, which, as ever, is very beautifully displayed on your bookshelf behind you. This is a really important book, as was mentioned earlier by Jessica Goldfinch. Not Goldfinch, Townsend. It really is quite early in the morning, but I'm glad we're doing this. I think it's.
What's your block on Jessica's name?
Yeah.
Jennifer Goldfinch. Where is she?
It's weird. John, how would you like to contribute some opening remarks to this conversation here this morning?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, just because I'm significantly less famous than either of the other people on the call, maybe just to say a quick word about it, to situate myself for folks.
Go for it.
And Caroline set me up beautifully by sharing Tim Jackson's takedown of the advertising industry, which I apologize, my friends, is where I spent the first 10 years of my career. But my journey in my life, really, my working life, has been a journey, well, partly of self-hatred, but then out of the other side of that, and really my work is animated by two questions. The first is, what are we doing to ourselves when we tell ourselves we're consumers constantly, when that is the sort of story of who we are, that is the white noise of our lives. And actually, that's not just about advertising. I think that's also, frankly, and this is a conversation we might want to get into about politics. Like our politicians are, even the best of our politicians treat us largely as consumers of politics, as if our only real agency is to choose between the options put before us every now and then, rather than to be active participants in shaping what politics might be and is. And the second question that animates my work, and the one that I try and focus on more because it's much more constructive and joyful, is what would it look like to put all the energy that currently goes into flogging stuff to people as consumers into inviting people into their agency as citizens. And so that's kind of me. I tumbled out of the advertising industry in heaps of pain about 10 years ago, 12, 14 years ago, and then started a thing called the New Citizenship Project, kind of playing with these ideas of what would it look like if organizations and institutions treated people as active participants with creative agency, rather than just as self-interested choice-making creatures. And really that speaks to why I'm such a fan of the book and the ideas. I mean, I think there's two things about the work of the Climate Majority Project that really stand out to me and that feel like they're worth underlining. And they come sort of through conversations with you and reading the work and knowing some of the people who are in the book. I thought that was a lovely way to start, actually, before the official start, to actually hear some of these people, because it gives the sense of what's already going on. I think the equation that's in my mind that the Climate Majority Project really speaks to is this one of honesty, a combination of honesty and agency, and that is the combination that leads to transformative action. And honesty, I think, is really worth underlining. Like there is a very big difference between fear suppressed and unacknowledged, which can be incredibly disempowering and create all sorts of underlying problems, and fear acknowledged and spoken to and allowed and permitted and then held, which I think is what this work is all about, what the Climate Majority Project is all about. It is about acknowledging that we're in serious trouble and not pretending that we're not. And I think a vast majority of people actually at some level know that, and so acknowledging it is quite a powerful thing to do. And then the point of agency for me is one that says, actually, like, we're not just, yes, we are our votes, and like I say, I'm keen to, maybe this is part of the conversation today, and it is vital to cast those votes and to be on the doorstep as well. And we are also our communities, and by communities I mean communities of place, passion, profession. We're who we are when we come together. And what we can do when we come together, and when we do that, the byproduct of that in itself is powerful and valuable, and in itself, in contexts where we may well be in serious trouble, is the direct work of building the resilience that will allow us to get through those things. And it is also a very powerful political act, because it's what creates the space for politics to move into. And that's how I think about what people like Anna Hyde and Belle Jacobs are doing at the Islington Climate Centre, what Joolz Thompson's doing with the stuff of the climate and of local climate action plans, what the folks in Bude have done by creating their own citizens' assembly on how they should deal with sea level rises, on the guys in the French ski resort of Aime-les-Plaines who have started a whole global collective of independent outdoor retailers that are moving to a reuse recycling model, and then started a campaign to hack Black Friday last year. Like, these people coming together in their places and in their communities is where the power is, and I think that for me comes through in this work. Like, I guess that one of the things I would sort of say, maybe my last point for now, like, I think I see it slightly differently to Caroline and John, maybe because I think this movement already does exist. Like, I think it's everywhere. I think it just doesn't know itself yet. And I think a big part of the work of Climate Majority Project is kind of introducing that movement to more parts of itself. And that's why I think calls like this are so important.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, John. I'm just going to respond to that last point because I couldn't agree more. This is one of the main reasons we founded what was first the New Moderate Flank and now the Climate Majority Project, precisely because we saw this is already happening, but people aren't aware that it's already happening, including the very people who are doing it. So we saw ourselves as trying to name something and help something to emerge more into a kind of collective self-consciousness in a positive way. And we think that that has enormous potential power when people like the folks in Community Climate Action and MP Watch and the Climate Hubs and the senior corporate lawyers in Lawyers for Net Zero, General Counsel Sustainability Forum, and the private group of insurance professionals that we're now working with, and so on. When all of these incredibly diverse people, you use this lovely phrase, communities of place, passion, or profession, when all these incredibly diverse people start to see there's a sense in which we're all pushing in the same direction, we're all part of the same wave, and we are legion, then it seems to me real active hope starts to begin or accelerate. So do you want to come back on that, John? Yeah, go ahead.
Just to share very quickly, the beautiful way that Brian Eno, bless his soul, what a lovely human being, put it in. He wrote the foreword to my book, which I'm eternally grateful for. But he has this lovely way of putting it. He says that revolutions happen in two phases. The first is when everyone realizes the system's broken. The second is when everyone realizes that everyone else realizes it.
Yeah.
And it's that the second phase that I think is what this work and this platforming work is all about.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, you just broke up slightly there, John, but I'll just repeat the essence of what I understood you to be saying just then, because it is, again, focal to our theory of change. It's technically called pluralistic ignorance, the idea that lots of people don't necessarily realize that they all agree on something. For example, there are polls, and John, you'll know the details of these better than me, that show that people underestimate the extent to which other people are altruistic in their values. They realize that they are themselves and that they care about doing good and looking after their family and loving people and loving nature and so forth. But they've been given this impression that other people are not like that. But actually, it can be enormously powerful when people start to realize, oh, actually, lots of people are like that. And one of the main things we're trying to do is to break pluralistic ignorance. Okay, so the three of you have given us an absolutely superb start. I want to allow a bit of time now for you to, as it were, talk among yourselves. I would love to hear if John, Caroline, and John have thoughts about each other's opening remarks and the resonances and the differences perhaps also between them. So anyone like to take up that invitation to respond to what you've heard from each other?
Well, I suppose one ought to say that I don't think there are differences between us. I think there are different ways of expressing these things, largely because of the circles in which we move and where we come from. I very much agree that very large numbers of people don't talk about climate change, support measures on climate change, because they think it's a bit odd. And of course it was once a bit odd. I mean, when I started to talk about it, when I was Deputy Minister for Agriculture, people thought it was very peculiar indeed, and that obviously one had got a bit of a hang-up about this. It was one of those things. Now they don't think that. But a lot of people in local communities do, and they don't talk about it because they think it'll make them sound a bit odd. And we've just got to make sure that people don't feel they are a bit odd, but that they're really saying what many others would say. And once they feel that, they'll say it more often. And they'll say it in the areas where you want them to say it. They'll say it in the supermarket, and they'll say it in the pub, and they'll say it when they meet people, and that is hugely important. And one of the things we've got to do is to get the media to do that. I get more and more cross when there are reports of particularly bad weather events, and the words climate change are not used. In other words, let's talk about 30 degrees in December in Spain, but don't let's ever mention that the reason for that is not just because of El Nino. It is actually the fundamental fact that our climate is changing. And the media will only change if we remember that words that I started with, which is that nobody ever says these things on the doorstep. People don't write and complain about it. That's exactly what we need to do all the time.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, I very much agree with. Yeah, I was just going to say I very much agree with John's focus on the media there. I think having a strategy around media is pretty important, because notwithstanding all of the really positive shoots of growth that other John, helpfully reminded us of, there is a real urgency to this, which of course we all know. But the question that's always in my head is just whether or not this alternative kind of ecology of movements can come together fast enough and at scale and speed, because as I mentioned earlier, I don't think we should underestimate the power of the vested interests ranged against us. And so, for example, if you were trying to persuade somebody to put some heat pumps into their home or whatever, you don't only have to deal with the fact that right now maybe the grants aren't high enough and the cost is too much and so forth, but you've also got a whole set of deliberate disinformation happening from a number of the right-wing banks who are going to try and tell you that they don't work and there's no point in having them. But my reason for saying that is simply just to say, let's not underestimate that there are forces out there that are actually trying to undermine what we're doing, and therefore we need to be incredibly joined up and mindful and savvy about the actions that we need to be taking.
Yeah, absolutely, Caroline. The way we see it is this. This movement, and in fact, I don't think the word movement is even kind of big enough. I like to call it a wave. I think that gives us a better sense of kind of real kind of breadth and internal diversity, and not just staying within the sort of activist mindset, which is not big enough for what we're trying to mobilize. This wave of action, this emerging ecology of organizations and movements and so forth, we see it as inevitable and as already emerging, and a lot of it as in very good shape. But we know it needs to be a lot bigger, a lot stronger, a lot more resourced, and it needs to move fast. And those are the live questions. Will it be fast enough? Will it be resourced enough? Will we be wise enough? Will we be smart enough? And will we be lucky as well? That can't be eliminated either. So that's the kind of framework, it seems to us, in which it's essential for people to try to find what their place is within this emerging system, within this huge open wave. It's also, I think, worth us also noting, though, that we have to be careful about this question. Will it be quick enough? You always have to ask the kind of follow-up question, for what? Because there isn't just kind of one tipping point here or one moment at which we either win or lose. There's going to be a whole sequence of potential positive and negative tipping points, and a whole set of questions facing, how much does our society decline materially? How much does it advance in terms of its capacity to build community, and so on and so forth? And that's one reason why one of the campaigns that we're initiating, another strategic campaign that I'm going to be leading, this is in the very early stages, is on adaptation. We are seeking to mobilize this year, and John and I are starting to work on this, among others, John Alexander, that is, a campaign on strategic and transformative adaptation, which we believe is absolutely necessary, because there is going to be a great deal of damage and decline before things start to get better. And B, we think it's also strategic, because if you approach adaptation in the right way, as for example is happening in our incubatee community climate action, and in some of the climate hubs, and in our new incubatee cadence roundtable, if you approach adaptation in the right way, it can be an enormous wake-up call, an enormous mindset shift to people, to realize we're not just talking about distant dates in the future for the diminution of levels of a colorless, odorless gas in our atmosphere. We're talking about real changes that are happening here and now, and we need to be able to respond to those changes and ride them in a way which is both psychologically and practically resilient. So we think that an emphasis on strategic and transformative adaptation could be a game changer in more ways than one, and that even if it is, as we suspect, too late for any kind of smooth and orderly, non-disruptive transition, it's not too late for us to do far, far better at coping with what's going to be coming at us. And if we do that in the right way, that could itself be transformative.
But that only works, frankly, if you keep ahead of all that all the time, that the kind of world which we build if we fight climate change is a better, happier, cleaner, more exciting world than the one we live in. The real trouble is that we've allowed the alternative to be, well, you know, it'll be miserable, you'll not like it, it'll stop you doing this and stop you doing that. What we have to do is to show, is really to show that. That's one thing. The other thing we've got to do, in my view, which is the opposite end of that, is to be much more vulgar. And I give a simple example. When the Tories won that by-election because of Joolz, no one was prepared to say, okay, so you will pay for this by 3 children in this constituency dying who wouldn't otherwise have died. In other words, we are not willing all the time to bring home to people what this means. So it's both having a view which is much more upbeat where we're going, and also a much more vulgar willingness to show what happens if you don't do things.
Yeah, very powerful.
I think there's a I'll try and pop the link in the chat. There's a way of thinking about this moment in time that I really love, that is illustrated by a thing called the 2 loops theory of change, that originally from the Kavanagh Institute, and a woman called Meg Wheatley who's behind it. And what they do is they draw 2 semicircles. The one is the existing system, the dominant story, which is which is a semicircle like that, and then the other is the emerging system, which is a semicircle kind of like this, but and the 2 don't meet, so they kind of overlap like so. And the argument they make is that there are times when an old story, an old system is in decline, but is still the dominant system, is still the structuring system that gives rise to all of the stories and the institutions. And the new emerging system is not yet fully formed enough to take over. And that their argument, put brutally simply, and I'm sure there are people on the call who know this work better than me, so I'm slightly fearful of describing this, but their argument essentially is that in times of change that fundamental, there is always some discontinuity there, because but also because we're still existing with the systems and structures of the old system, while at the same time trying to birth and build the new. But I think it speaks very powerfully to what you were just saying, John, because I think it helps us understand that there are kind of two separate bits of work to be done. They have lovely language on the old system. They talk about the work of hospicing, helping the old system die with dignity, but actually making sure it dies and getting it out of the way and composting it. And I think that's really a helpful thing to understand. But also drawing our attention to the idea that there is also work that must be done. Am I still with you? Sorry, I got a low bandwidth warning.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm still with you. There is also work to be done on the emerging system. And I think because the dominant system is dominant, our attention tends to be drawn to it. And our attention tends to be drawn to diagnosing the problems in it and focusing on what's wrong, rather than drawing our attention as much as possible to what's emerging and what's right and what can be built. And I think there was a lovely moment in the conversations with the woman who worked with me on my book, Ariana Conrad, who's a total genius. She said to me, she talked about the chapter 10 problem. She said most books by white men are 9 chapters of diagnosing the problem in ever more accurate detail, and then 1 chapter of some throwaway solutions that they don't really believe in. And if you want to write one of those, then you can off. And so the idea was to say, like, and I think that the reason I emphasize that is because yes, we need to focus. We need to sort of call out what's going on. We need to hospice the old. We need to make it die. And yet there is so much energy being drawn to that. And one of the reason why I'm so drawn to the Climate Majority Project is because I think it is a resetting of that balance. It is saying, and I hear you, Caroline. But I do believe, like, this work on the emergent system, the 2 loops guys that Meg Wheatley talks about, the 4 tasks of naming, connecting, nourishing, and amplifying. And that work is actually what builds that system into something far more than you can possibly imagine. And I guess my sort of countering concern is that if we allow too much of our energy to be trying to kill the old, or trying to deconstruct it or diagnose it, there's like Bayo Komolafe, the Nigerian philosopher, who's an absolute wonder, has this lovely phrase that has made me, I've meditated on many a time. He says the phrase, "What you resist persists," like what you pay attention to grows. And so when all of our attention is going into what's wrong, we're actually feeding it. And so this thing for me of like I get so excited by this stuff, and it's not, and I know each individual story is not enough, but look, there are 400 plus community energy organizations across England alone. Like, wow, right? What if that comes together? What if that can really see itself and see all of the local climate action plans? What might be then possible for them to do, but also for politics to move into, because that's what makes it cool, right? That when you see that power. So I'm sorry, I'm in danger of rambling, but I think I really just want to offer that kind of 2 loops thing of the kind of, yes, let's pay attention to what we have to hospice, what we have to kill, but also let's really believe in and platform that work. Caroline, I have to say, I'm so excited for you to be outside, because I can't wait to see what you do. I know lots of people are kind of mourning the idea that you won't be in there anymore, but I, for one, am super excited.
That's very kind, John. Thank you. I'm pretty excited too. and I love the model that you've described. That makes a lot of sense to me. I suppose I don't know. I feel as if I've put myself in the position in this conversation of being devil's advocate, and I don't quite know why I've done that. Maybe I got out of bed the wrong step this morning, because I am essentially quite positive about all this stuff, but I suppose I'm aware that even when you're talking about, the 400 energy companies, which is fantastic, but we know that there are obstacles on a national level. There isn't the right kind of policy framework to enable them to be able to flourish in the way that they do. So maybe it's just because I'm in transition. Maybe I'm in that liminal state between being on the inside and on the outside, because while I'm still more on the inside at the moment, therefore perhaps more focused on what's dying, I'm very aware that even in its death throes, it's doing a bloody good job of obstructing some of the things on the outside that could be flourishing and growing even more. As simple as being able, you are an energy, if you create more energy in your home than you need from renewables, solar on your roof, you can't at the moment sell it to your neighbour. You're not allowed to do that. Something as simple as that could be changed. We can hit the dying system a little bit harder.
Yeah.
An appropriate metaphor on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a sense in which it's all a question of glass half empty or half full here, isn't it? Because, for example, John mentioned very strongly, look, we've got to actually describe how we can be leading people here towards a better life, right? And this has been a big theme of Caroline's work for a very long time. So I think all of us are very capable of seeing how of seeing the need to emphasize how the existing system is holding us back, and seeing the need to emphasize how the new system is already emerging and just waiting to be empowered. But of course, the point is we can't just wait. We have to make it happen. We have to make it enabled. And that's why we're supporting so many of the projects we're supporting. It's also why in our strategic campaigning, one of the main things we're doing is trying to bring pressure to bear on the existing political system to enable the kind of changes which would be potentially transformative, whether that's in relation to adaptation or in relation to resourcing climate distress or in relation to breaking through the free market fundamentalist dogma in business and enabling the understanding that most business people understand that they can't actually do the kind of thing they need to do and want to be able to do in many cases unless there is proper government regulation on climate and nature. A YouGov poll showed 82% of business people recognize that fact, which is, you know, remarkable in a way, given the ubiquity of both a can-do spirit and free market fundamentalist ideology washing around the sphere of business. And then to come back to media on this, so a lot of the work that we in the Climate Majority Project do is out in public, but some of it also happens in private. So we've been having private meetings at a high level with the BBC and with ITV, trying to nudge them in a better direction on climate reporting and so forth. But ultimately, in the longer term, we believe that there is no way, as you were all, I think, saying earlier, there is no way of actually getting to where we need to get to unless there is a massive change to the media, which is going to have to include, it seems to us, and it'd be interesting to know what people think about this, going to have to include, roughly speaking, us getting our own version of GB News. I mean, us in a broad sense, like the Climate Majority, right? It's going to have to include new media. We can't trust that nudging along the old media is going to be enough, or, you know, confronting or getting Ofcom to unmask GB News, etc. That's not going to be enough. Ultimately, we actually need to have a transformed and a new media if we're going to really make it through in the way that we all hope we will, without some kind of horrendous collapse event occurring. So yeah, I'd love to know if anyone's got any thoughts on that, and by anyone I mean also anyone on the call. If you are interested in helping us with that media work, do get in touch. So
it's an interesting one.
Yeah, John, go.
Just on media, whether we, whatever we mean by that, need to create a new outlets, new ecosystems. I mean, some are emerging, like I mean, the Byline Times is a really interesting kind of space that's building very fast. I worry a little bit that Peter and the gang kind of are very fixated on diagnosing the problem still. I don't see that many spaces yet where there's really, I mean, positive news and these sorts of things, but they can feel quite, it's like, how do we platform the genuine power that these things have, that these movements have, I think is a big question. I mean, I don't know. I think it's an interesting thought. I just sort of feel myself wanting to keep emphasizing whose names I'm seeing in the chat and what organizations there are there, because there are so many. Like there's the Marc Cridge from National Park City campaign. Like there's a campaign that is at the level of ambition as the national parks movement in the 19th century to create national park cities, integrate nature into cities all over the world. There's 25 cities globally going through that process already, and it only started a couple of years ago. Like so a part of me is like, maybe we need to create new media channels. Maybe though that I do think there's so many good people who want to be doing this work. I go back to that did you say pluralistic ignorance is the technical term I was talking about? Thanks for that. I'm going to keep that one. But there's so many people in positions of power and influence in these existing systems who just don't seem to be able to see, because I believe because they're so fixated because they're so in what's wrong that they can't. And that we do have these storytelling platforms that could be doing this work, like what, and I don't actually believe that they're against it. So it's again like it's an edge of thinking for me. But how do we really build the storytelling of the emerging in such a way as it's trivializing it?
Can I say There are some very basic and simple things which we ought to do. And I think John is absolutely right to refer to all the people who are on this call. But I just now ask at every meeting I do, and after all, it tends to be meetings of people who've come together because they care about this subject. I tend to start off by asking how many people present have been to see their local member of parliament talking about climate change in the last 6 months. And the results are dismal, miserable. And the fact of the matter is, if you want to change from the one semicircle to the other, you actually have to make the present semicircle work for you to make that change. And a system in which members of parliament in the end are going to have to vote on a whole range of these things will only work if they are actually frightened about the fact their constituents will be demanding of them. I spoke as a warm-up act for Elton John at Glastonbury this year. And I had 2 meetings of 250 plus people who'd chosen to come to it. And in one, 3 people had been to see their member of parliament in the last 6 months, and in the other 4. And these are the people who are supposed to be active. Now, I think that if every single one of the people who are members of the various groups, who, as you put it, John, are in the middle of it, also thought that being in the middle of it meant that you went to your member of parliament on a regular basis, you booked and you talked about the bit of climate change which you know about, that member of parliament will become more and more concerned lest he put off or she put off the people who believe these things. If he never hears from them or she never hears from them, it's not surprising they say, this isn't an issue and I can shut up about it and I don't want to have trouble.
Now, Caroline or John might want to respond to that. Just before they do, let me say we're about to move into the next phase of this webinar. So if you've got a question brewing, then please start writing it in the chat and/or get ready to put your finger on the raise hand button. And hopefully this system will work, that people will come through. My wonderful technical team who work in the background may send me questions in my WhatsApp, or they may bring people directly on to ask their questions directly. We'd love to have you unmuted and speaking directly with us when we move to the Q&A in a moment. So just before we do that, John, you wanted to respond to John?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a yes and. Like I'm not saying that we shouldn't go and I have. I could put my hand up, John. I've done it.
Good, excellent. You've got to go and do it again. That's the thing. Not just once.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, mate. It wasn't the most rewarding experience. I live in Sevenoaks, so yeah. ... But anyway, the thing I wanted to say is I also think that there is. I'm sort of yes, and I also think that there are ways to, and we need to investigate. And the lesson from around the world is that there are ways to, and there need to be ways to try and create that democratic legitimacy, that democratic power, actually from outside these systems.
Yeah.
Because I mean, they're not evolving fast enough. I'm really fascinated at the moment. I've been digging deep into the background of the Irish structure of a citizens' assembly, as that's now an ongoing part of the Irish political structures. And so the famous story of the referendum on abortion in 2018, where 66% of the population voted to legalise access to abortion up to 12 weeks. What many people don't know is that the recommendation that went to referendum was formed by a citizens' assembly, by 99 randomly selected members of the Irish population, brought together for 5 weekends over 5 months to deliberate and learn and hear from witnesses and make a recommendation. And they made that recommendation. And then when that referendum happened, it was 2 years after Brexit, all of the same disinformation and lies and so forth were being thrown around. But Fintan O'Toole wrote this lovely piece in The Guardian where he said like that referendum was immune to the usual disinformation because the people who were brought on to breakfast TV and radio and so on weren't people arguing over the heads of the population. They were the people the randomly selected people who had been members of the assembly talking about their own personal experience as peers. And so there's something really powerful in that moment for how our democracy might work. But what's really interesting is that the original Citizens' Assembly in Ireland back in 2011 actually wasn't run by government. It was run by a little group of academics in response to the Icelandic financial crisis, who came together with a group of entrepreneurs. They called themselves We the Citizens. And they fundraised, created an assembly to look at how a couple of questions, including how to build trust in politics and how to respond to the IMF strictures. They ran it outside of government, outside of politics. They invited politicians from all parties to be witnesses to it, but they built the democratic legitimacy for that thing and platformed it, and they got all of the attention to be directed towards it from outside, and then they allowed the politics to step into those recommendations. Now, I'm very aware of the UK Climate Assembly. I'm very aware of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, all of these things. But my worry with those, and what I think is so interesting about what happened in Ireland, is that my worry is that they are still asking the existing systems to commission something. And I think there is a real power in figuring out how to do this from outside, drawing organizations and convening power into that, and drawing attention towards it, and saying, like, this is actually, like, we experimented with an approach like this. We did a campaign called the People's Plan for Nature with RSPB, National Trust, WWF. I think there are, and I'm not saying we've got it right yet, but I think there's lessons from Ireland, a similar story in Taiwan as how the Taiwanese democracy has shifted, similar stories all over the world. Like this, and this thing of, like, how do we work in a time when we know that the existing systems aren't fully able to fix? I think it's a yes and. It's not just about, can we ask them to shift? It's not just about, can we campaign and attack? It's also, can we build, can we connect up, can we create the space for it to move into? And that's yeah, I think that's important.
I entirely agree with that. But it is both and it isn't either or, and it isn't ignoring the system we've got. Because if you do that, we put the whole thing off much longer. If people can't get out of the fact that they are going to be under real pressure, if they go along with stupid things like extending the life of the North Sea, they need to be under real pressure. And I know of very few members of Parliament who feel themselves under real pressure. And that's why I want to get that right.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Caroline. This webinar so far has been everything that we hoped for and more. Now, for the remaining part, I want to make sure we do involve the citizens, as it were, on the call. So we're going to move to questions, and some wonderful questions have been shared through the team with me already. And I'll start with this one. Does your book give the type of questions or talking points a non-expert like me can ask or talk to my MP? Does anyone on the panel want to take that with regards to the book, or indeed with regard to their own knowledge? How should we take up the invitation that John Deben John Selman-Gummer, Lord Deben, has just issued earlier on the call for us? So to repeat the question, does the book give the type of questions or talking points a non-expert like me can ask or talk to my MP? Anyone want to have a go at taking that? No, then I'll try another one.
I could offer something, actually. I could offer something on that. Am I unmuted?
Oh, Rosie, hello. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I am the short answer is no. It's certainly not. It's certainly not pre-digested in that particular way. But what the book does contain is the encouragement to let it percolate and to sort of take up the invitation for everyone to sort of find what speaks to them. And find the message that is most resonant for them, find the area of work that feels most relevant to them, and to sort of bed into it until that question kind of answers itself for the reader. So there is no, because this is the sheer scale of this effort means that there is no real one-size-fits-all message, and there's no one-size-fits-all sort of piece of action that we're able to offer to a general reader. But there is really this deep invitation to kind of to feel into that question for yourself, and then to have the confidence to feel empowered that your particular piece of the puzzle is part of the puzzle, and that it matters, and that you can take that message proudly forward into whatever context you feel you can offer it, and speak to your MP, and don't feel that we need to put those words in your mouth.
I feel like Jessica Goldfinch Townsend might have something to say about this, Rupert, if you wanted to.
Yeah, Jessica, do you want to seek to get on and respond while I'm waiting for you to perhaps?
I'd love to. Thank you, Jennifer Goldfinch here.
Oh, dear, you're being very tough on me this morning, guys.
No,
go ahead. It's fine.
I'm very fond of you, Rupert. Thank you. Yes, so MP Watch, Lord Deben, is doing exactly what you say. We're trying to set up lobby groups in every constituency to kind of mark the MP and the candidates, and to work out what they're doing, how they're voting, and then report to other constituents what's going on. Because one of the things that happen is, because Westminster seems so complex and far away from people in constituencies, they don't necessarily know how they voted on the offshore petroleum bill or any of that. And we're saying the next day, Philip Hollowbone, why did you vote against this bill when it is against the interests of your constituents? So we are MP bothering, to coin a phrase, and we think there should be 650 of these groups across the country, so every MP knows strongly what their constituents feel. Now, of course, there's a range of opinion in constituencies. So if you were doing something that was a little bit more sort of on the edge, then you would be getting a range of opinion. But we know that the climate issue is not being addressed, and it's not being addressed properly. And before I jump off so that other people can speak, I think there's a really massive opportunity that's coming down the road. The focus group that I did at the weekend was in Rees-Mogg's constituency, and it was with soft Tories, if you like. So Conservatives who are, and a lot of MPs sincerely believe the delay shtick of Rishi Sunak's government. They sincerely believe it. They believe that what comes out of Conservative central office isn't delayist, that it's on the button. But once the Conservatives are out of power, there is going to be an opportunity for environmental Conservatives to join this movement. And they have been tied up with the status quo. And that is potentially a game changer. And we all should be ready for that. We need those people. We're never going to get the far right and Reformer, coming out with the misinformation, but the middle of the road folks are going to be up for grabs, and we need to have our plans ready for the first 100 days and after in order to try to bring them into the movement.
But could I please come in on that? Yeah. I don't think it's just that. I don't think I remember a single time in my long history in politics in which so many people are uncertain as to how to vote. We're in a situation in which the truth is that although they hate the Tories, they don't like many other people either. and there will be more opportunities for people to decide to vote on single issues than we've ever had before. And therefore, knowing what the candidates actually think is going to be crucially important. And I must say, I'd be very happy to talk to any of your groups that you've got if you think that that would be helpful, because we've got to win these votes at the next election wherever we can. It's a crucially important thing. We've got to get every candidate to recognise that they've got to be serious about climate change, and even if they do take potty views about it, their constituents must be told about it. Really do need that, and we'll get more reaction from that, I think, this next election than we've ever had before. So let's wait until afterwards. Let's change them before. Let's get them actually on the on that position in advance, because I think there's a huge number of people who will be making up their mind.
Yes, no, absolutely, Lord Deben, and we're working on that. We're looking at every candidate and trying to hold them to account on their climate and nature policies as well. So thank you. We would love to talk to you, by the way.
You have only to ask.
Yeah, great. So I'll connect the two of you after the call. That's a brilliant offer, John. Thanks so much. I am going to read a couple more questions out. Here's a question which I think I'm able to answer. So many good questions are working on this and speaking here, but burrowing away and not getting attention. So is an umbrella organization needed to publicize more? Well, I'm glad to be able to tell this questioner that we are the Climate Majority Project, and that is, I think, part of our very purpose. So hopefully we can do some of that for you. Here is an interesting, bold question, which I wonder if Caroline might want to try to essay an answer to. By the way, John Alexander is still here. He's just come off his video. How would you adapt these strategies to the global south, where priorities are immediate survival? There's an easy one for you, Caroline.
I'm just going to turn my video off.
Yeah, good.
I mean, it's a very good question, and I don't know that I do have any immediate answers, except to say that actually there is so much we can already learn from what's happening in the global south, and frankly, in many respects, they're well ahead of us in terms of the way in which there are community-led projects who, in spite of all of the many forces ranged against them, are acting together out of necessity. And, you know, I think we draw huge inspiration from many of the farmers' movements in India, for example, or some of the movements around water in some of the countries of Saharan Africa. So, although I absolutely take the point that in some, you know, if you're talking about the global south, then an analysis of advertising or something may be less relevant, although actually you could still probably make a case about the rising middle class and how aspiration is being framed now in some of those countries too. But actually, I think we need a real level of humility and to reach out to those countries to learn from them, because frankly, their sense of community and their sense of working together is often so much stronger than ours, because it's had to be, because there haven't been, you know, the role of the state just hasn't been there in so many failed states, and so people have come together.
Yeah, that's marvelous, Caroline. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think those are really, really strong points. We're starting a little bit of work in the Climate Majority Project with Bayo Akomolafi, who is bringing some of these concerns to us and is going to be working with us a little bit on the Open Society Foundation grant-funded work that we're going to be doing over the next couple of years. And ultimately, of course, if there is going to be a climate majority, it needs to be not just in this country, but everywhere. And that will mean that the global majority, the majority world, is obviously the majority of it. And I have another question here, which again is a very interesting, bold, different question. Can we navigate this transition without engaging the spiritual dimensions of our reality? The spiritual includes the psychological, but includes deeper territory, which is also at play. Suffering, sacrifice, what is ultimate? What is the whole of which we are part? What is holy and it includes the understanding of everyday practice. This element seems to be missing in the discussion so far. So I'm going to make a little start on answering that. And I wonder if Rosie might want to come back and say something more on it. I take the question. I think it's a good question. Ultimately, this civilizational crisis is not just a political crisis. It does have something worth calling a spiritual dimension. We take that to be present in the inner work dimension of our work. The challenging thing, and why perhaps it hasn't kind of been explicitly mentioned on the call so far, is one has to try to find ways of doing this which don't raise high barriers to entry and make people feel excluded, and sort of re-divide us up into tribes of say, you know, the spiritual and the secular or something at war with each other. So we try to find ways of engaging in this kind of work which are as open as possible to as wide a number of people as possible. Rosie, what would you like to seek to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sense in which we're a bit worried about, well, I say we, the field in general is somewhat worried about alienating people when you start talking about the inner or the contemplative or any sort of non-material aspect of this kind of crisis. But also part of the crisis that we face is people's alienation from that inner world, from its relationship with reality, and that realization that it's part of reality. So I think everyone has a very accessible door to the inner aspect of the crisis. It's right here, it's with us all the time, and the need to speak to that is very potent. And I think as well with this sort of like two loop idea, which I think is very, very helpful. Actually, I'm grateful to have accessed that today. I think it's the same with the inner dimension of the crisis. There is the inner aspect of how we have constructed the systems that are failing us now, and we can focus on that, but we can also focus on the inner aspect of the systems that we want to build and the future that we want to build, and the inner capacities that we have for transformation, which are so powerful, and which really we can't ignore when we're contemplating what the future is that we want to see.
Brilliant, Rosie, thank you. Right, in our final 5 minutes, can I ask Yajia to bring one or two of the people with raised hands into the discussion to put their questions verbally to the panel and to the webinar? Can we do that? Great. So we've got Anna there, who of course is also in the book as one of the people who contributed to the Climate Hubs chapter. Anna, what would you like to say or ask?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Rosie and you for getting the book together, because it's quite a good achievement. And Liam, sorry. And what it does is platform some good ideas, which is what John does in his book as well. So there are people all over the world and country, and they're doing great work. And I think that maybe the most useful thing the Climate Majority Project could do is help showcase that work and connect people with each other, because we're all remaking the wheel. So it's kind of I think we should do a conference. I think we should do a conference and everybody can come and show all the brilliant stuff that they're doing, just like Jessica has this morning with this MP Watch. I'm sure not everybody knew about it on the call. I have put a link in for our Discourses of Denial cards, which gives you 12 sort of pithy answers to every time a Tory says something like, what about China? Technology will save us, all those things from Cambridge. But it's sharing best practice, because if you're building community, it's really hard work, right? Really hard work. And every shortcut you can get is helpful, but reading 12 toolkits isn't helpful. We're in a very time sensitive place. So that was the thing I was just going to request. Can we do it with the Climate Majority Project? Because everybody on this call's got something brilliant to share, as we can see from the chat. And yes, Lord Deben, I think we should, it's like basic doing our MPs. That's like ground level. And then it's what we do on top. But as community organisers, we have more power when we talk to our MPs than individuals.
Thank you so much, Anna. That is a fascinating suggestion. The CMP team will discuss it, and maybe we'll get back to you and so on. I can see that already some people in the chat think it's an idea that's worth considering. Brilliant. Do we have a final question from a raised hand?
If Michael Albert's around, I messaged him as he was, say, second. Okay, so we can.
Michael, are you there?
Cool. Yes. Thank you.
Great.
Great.
Distinctly, please.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for all the great talks. Just a quick question, because I agree with the whole project and how do we, build a broad majority. I'm just curious if some of you can speak to the question of building across the right-left divide, because that's going to involve engaging people with different values, potentially anti-migration stances, for instance, or people who believe in fiscal prudence and these kinds of ideas that might be incompatible with actually taking the necessary action. So how do we negotiate those tensions in trying to build this climate majority? Thanks.
That is
Can I say a quick word, Rupert?
Who's that? John? Yes, go ahead.
Alexander.
Yeah, say a last thing from you, John.
Yeah, last word from me, which is in response to this question, just to say there's a lovely thing. Ece Temilkuran, the Turkish writer whose work I would highly recommend, has this thing. She says, when you stand back in the abstract, these questions become really divisive and difficult. When you get up close and you get into it in community, then they actually recede quite dramatically, because it's not about big abstract arguments about migration and so on. It's about what can we do together. And when you start to work together, then you build relationships that change everything. So that's really the answer I want to give. And then the second thing to say, which really is my drop of the Climate Majority Project, is look, I posted the link in the chat to the Nature Climate paper. 89% of the population across 125 countries want intensified political action. 69% of the population across 125 countries are willing to sacrifice personal income in order to have that action. And those numbers are higher actually in the global south because they're already in it. So there is this idea of a climate majority. Just my last thing is there is a climate majority. It's not about creating one. It's about making it conscious of itself. So I'll just leave you with that. And sorry, I had to go on to mobile.
No, thanks, John. That's a lovely final thought from you. Caroline or John, any final remarks in response to Michael or across the whole thing?
Well, I just want to say that in the last one contribution, there was a comment about Tories like that. If you treat the whole of a party like that, you misunderstand what it's all about. The truth of the matter is, just remember, net zero by 2050. The Climate Change Act actually written by Tories. So there's a whole group of people who have been absolutely in the lead on climate change, just because this government is coping so appallingly badly. So don't ever use that. We've got a political consensus which needs to be turned into a really powerful group. And if you use your own particular political views, I refuse to do any meetings which are about one party against another on this subject. And it is absolutely essential that we maintain the concept which is true, which is that climate change will be beaten only if the whole of the political parties accept the responsibility they've taken on. So I'm sorry to have a go at that, but it is unacceptable to try to bring party politics into where we are. There are a lot of Tories who should be ashamed of themselves, but they should be ashamed of themselves, not because they're Tories, but because of their views. And you have to change those views. And you mustn't let them get away with it, which is what you were doing in Mr. Rees-Mogg's constituency. Right, I've had my rant.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's a great final remark from you. As we are now at the end, I'm just going to say a final thank you to our marvelous panelists, to my co-editors and co-authors in the book, to everyone here. It has been a really encouraging call. I do hope that if you haven't already done so, it will prompt you to buy this book. Look how pretty it is. No, the content's good too, as you've no doubt heard on this call. Do save the chat if you want. Do go to the Climate Majority website if you haven't done so to sign up for semi-regular updates. And we will see you again, and we will be back in touch through our email list and through our WhatsApp announcement list. You can join that if you want by contacting the main Climate Majority email address or Yajia, to let you know on further developments in response to the kinds of stuff we've been talking about here this morning. Thank you very much, everybody, and now have a good day. Bye-bye. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.